In this video, we will demonstrate how to create your own custom recipe. This video will actually be separated into 4 separate sections, with each section covering a specific topic in the recipe building process. The 4 topics will be building rows, building columns, the nav and actions, and then the find tool and advanced selectors. And if you want to jump ahead to those sections, you can actually find those videos further along in the help documents, or you can just continue watching this video. So let's jump right in. So first we'll open up Data Miner. And first I'd like to point out that you will see an empty space here. This is actually where your recipes will be stored once you create a few. Alright, so now let's go ahead and click on New Recipe. And now you'll see is the first Start tab, which is where you pick the type of recipe. It can either be a list recipe or a detail recipe. A list recipe is when you're looking at multiple search results and it's going to have multiple pages. So we are actually looking at a list page right now. It has multiple individuals and multiple pages. And what you'll do to separate out the individuals is by building your rows. So let's go ahead and click on to the second tab. So as I was mentioning, the rows is the process of where you establish containers, and you're essentially telling the recipe to extract information just from within those containers. And it's what you use to separate the data from one another. So let's go ahead and just begin. So I'll click the Find button, and then you'll see with your mouse that you can now hover and highlight different areas of the page. And you'll see that we can highlight different sections or different containers of the individuals. So what we want to do is hover until our mouse is highlighting one entire example that we want to extract. So right about here is good. So now with my keyboard, I'll hit Shift. And then on the right here in Recipe Creator, you'll see that there are now a few suggested elements that we can use as our selectors. The pending dotted line means that the information is just pending, and that's kind of where we're focused. But to actually lock in the specific container, you have to pick either a class or an element type that's suggested here on the right. So it looks like we have a class called row. Let's go ahead and pick that. And that does not look ideal because we have multiple green lines, when really we want the green line to wrap around just the specific data we want. So let's try a div. And it looks like div is even worse. Our goal is to create a selector that is specific to just the area you want to extract information from. When we don't have anything perfect right off from the very beginning, what we can do is select parent, which is a button here in the top right. So clicking select parent will actually move the focus line. Here, let me get rid of that so you can see better. It will move the focus or the dotted line further up the HTML. So as you can see, as we click it, it goes further and further. Let me start over. So we're at the rows, and then I do select parent, and now it gave us some more containers, more classes. So now we have a class called person container. So that sounds appropriate. Let's give that a try. Great. So now as you can see, we have the green line wrapping around just the information we want. So now that is done, all you have to do is press confirm. So at this point, you've now established your containers, and at this point, you are pretty much good to go. So the next step would be to build your columns. All right, so now we are going to build some columns. The columns is the third tab here, and the columns are essentially just the individual pieces of data. So this would be anything from price to name to URL. So all you'll do is go ahead and begin building individual column cards. So let's go ahead and give the first input field something. So that is name. So let's say we want to extract the URL. So you'll put that as your name, and then the extraction type, rather than text, we'll select URL. And then once again, with the find tool, we're going to select that, and then we're going to hover, and instead of capturing an entire container, this is when we go after the specific piece of data. So now if we want to get the URL, that's typically either in the image or in a topic's name or a product's name. So now let's hit Shift, and as you can see, we have a few classes. So we have one class and one element type. Typically, if you're looking for a URL, it's always going to be within an A tag. So that's something to keep in mind. So we see an A tag, or sorry, an A element. So since we have that, we can try that, but it looks like we have multiple. So rather than doing that, remember we need something specific. So let's do the class headline, which is great. It's capturing just the person's name. So now we can do confirm, and we can actually double check our work by clicking on the for here. And as you can see, we have the 4 URLs. And this is just a little eyeball preview area you can click on for all your individual columns. So let's go ahead and move on to the second column. Let's say we want to just get the name this time. So put name, and for extract type, that will just be text at this point since it's just text off the web page. And then we'll do the find button. And once again, we'll hover and tap shift. And once again, we have the headline. And we'll press confirm. And let's say we do one more just for a different example. So we'll give this a name, and let's say we want to do the image. So we'll do image, and then rather than text, we'll extract the image URL, and we'll hit the find button. And once again, we with our mouse will hover, and then on our keyboard, we will hit shift. And it looks like we do not have any options there. So maybe that was a bad hover, so let's try that again. So we'll hover and hit shift. Great, so now we have this class called person image. That looks much better. So let's confirm, and now we have an image URL. Perfect. So now we can close out of that preview, and that is pretty much it for the columns video. We'll go ahead and move on to the next video, and that will be the nav and actions. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon. All right, welcome back. We are now going to be focusing on the nav section of the recipe building process. So this is where you will use the same find button, but rather than building rows or columns, you'll actually use it to find the next page button on a web page. And essentially what you're doing here is just telling the recipe to find this button and then click it every time you find a new page, and then it will scrape. All right, so to do that, we'll click the find button once again. We'll hover and we'll hit shift on the next page button. And as you can see, there is once again a class suggested, and it looks like it's called next. And I'd also like to point out that it is an A element, which means that there's going to be a URL here, which is good. We're not extracting the URL this time, but we are going to be using that URL to navigate to the next page. All right, so let's do confirm, and we can actually test it here. So let's press test navigation. Great, so it looks like it took us to the second page. That means that's working. And at this point, that is good. So there's nothing else we need to do here. So we can move on to the next section, or the next topic of this section, which is actions. And actions are going to be typically used for more advanced pages. The actions are whenever you need to click on an element to reveal something. So like, let's say you have to click a show more button to reveal an email, or you have to click a display button to display like a phone number. So that is what you would use for the pre-scrape here. And then we have an additional one called scroll to page end. This is if you ever need to have the page scroll to the bottom. This is in case the web page is longer and it doesn't load all of it right away, or if there are maybe images that have something called a lazy load where it won't display the information until you've scrolled to the bottom. So that is pretty much the purpose of that action. So it's again to scroll to the bottom of a page to allow the page to fully load. Now I want to kind of clarify, this process does not work for infinite scroll, for meaning if the page will continuously add more to the bottom by clicking a show more button or by clicking a load more. So whenever a page paginates or loads more on top of each other, that is actually when you do infinite scroll with click. And with this process, you essentially will be, rather than finding the next page button here, you'll actually will find the show more button, and then you'll have that selector in here, and then you'll tell Data Miner how many times you want to click. So by default it's 10, and then the wait time is 3 seconds. So what this means is Data Miner will look for the show more button at the bottom of the page, it will click it 10 times, and then it will wait 3 seconds for the full page to load. and then it will do its one single scrape. Where with the next page pagination, it will actually scrape after every click. So you'll click to page 3 and scrape, click to 4 and scrape, and then click to 5 and scrape. Where with the infinite scroll, what it would do is it would do 1 click, 2 click, 3 click, all the way until 10 clicks once it's showing all the data, and then it would scrape. Otherwise, you would get repeated data since you're still scraping the same page. I know that was a lot, so hopefully that made sense, but if you don't quite understand it, feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to kind of explain it via email support. So now that I've gone through the 3 actions, I'll quickly demonstrate how to add them. So I'm actually going to change it up and go to another page here. Cool. So this is where we can just practice some actions real quick. So what I'll do here is, rather than actually having a find button for every individual action, what you'll do is actually start from the top here, click the find button, and then you'll once again hover and shift over the item you want to get a selector for. So hover and hit shift, and now as you can see we have a class called email button. So we'll select that, press confirm, and then what we'll do is actually just copy this, and then we'll paste it in where we want it. So since we're clicking a show email button, that will be a click. So what we'll do is paste that into here in the click on element, and then you can actually test it and see how that works. Perfect. So that's working. And then all you have to do is add it. And once it's added, then you're good to go. And just for the sake of demonstrating, I'll do one more example. So scroll to page end. All you have to do here is just simply add it. Great, so now we have our 2 actions, and you can actually shift them around if you want to change the order, but I think click on element and then scroll is good. And just so this page works, let's reviewing this real quick. I think it should still work even though we changed the page. So what we'll do is actually save it. So let's just say test scrape 1 with click, and you can actually just put a description. So let's say show email, and scroll. Let's change this to actions. Cool. So now we have our recipe and we can go ahead and save it. So at this point, we'll now go ahead and just run recipe here from the middle. And actually, I should show you this. So it clicked. Here, I'll try and do that one more time. So you can see it. So let's actually go to edit. And go back here. All right, so I'll hide that, and let's see if I can kind of demonstrate this real quickly. So we'll do run recipe, move that out of the way. Great, so you hopefully saw that click, and then it is now scrolling. And once it gets to the bottom, it might give us some data. No, it will not give us any data because we actually built the recipe for the previous page. So sorry if that is slightly confusing, but what we can actually do is we can edit this once again, and then let's just go back to our original sandbox, and we'll get rid of the actions since you just saw those, and then we can actually save this recipe once again. And what we'll do is, let's just get rid of that, and this will be just a basic scrape, and then I'll do save as. So now we have 2 separate recipes that we just built. And just so you can now see this run from the original view, the viewer, or the data miner recipe viewer, I'll open up recipe or data miner once again. And as you can see, we now have our 2 recipes. We have test scrape 1 with actions, and then the test scrape 1 without any actions. And you can also actually see the indicators here on the right. So what we'll do is just run it. And now as you can see, now that we're on the proper page, we have the information we extracted. So we have URL, the name, and then the image. Cool. So at this point, you can pretty much download it. You can either do a CSV, Excel file, or copy it to your clipboard. So that is pretty much it for this process. So we have one more section we're going to cover That is going to be the find tool in just advanced selectors. But this is pretty much all you really need to build a recipe. I still recommend watching that last video because we will cover the details and the tricks and tips you'll need to tackle more challenging websites. So I definitely recommend watching that. But I hope this video has been helpful so far, and I'll talk to you again in a moment. All right, welcome back. So we are on our last section, which will be the find tool and the advanced selectors. So as you can see, we have our two recipes from before, and what we'll do now is just, I think, maybe go ahead and edit one. And what we'll do is essentially go through just the find tool in a little bit more detail, and I'll cover some advanced selectors you'll need for some more challenging websites. First, let's just quickly review. So we established our rows. So we have 4 rows, and it's person container. And then we have individual columns. We have URL, name, image, and then we did our nav. And then we also added actions from the previous page, but then we also got rid of those because they are not for this page we're currently looking at. Cool. So now let's jump back to the columns, because this is where you'll spend most of your time using the find tool and the advanced selectors. So at this point, let's go ahead and create a new column, and we'll give it a name. Let's just say testing, and we will now click the find tool. So as I mentioned in the earlier videos, the find tool will activate the hover, and you will be able to highlight by moving your mouse over different elements. And once you hit shift, you will then kind of have the information in focus, but you need to select a selector here on the right to lock it in. So a little information about the stuff here on the right. So we have classes, element types, and then one other item you're going to see is called IDs. This is all information taken directly from the HTML, and what we use is just what we do essentially is just take that information, and then we use it as anchors so data miner knows where to find the information based on the classes or the elements. Sometimes the elements or the classes will just be kind of random numbers and letters. Other times it might be organized names. It really depends on the site, but ultimately what your first thing to do should be just to kind of click around and do like trial and error to see what seems to be working the best. And the way to gauge what's working is simply by looking on the website to see what is highlighting. So for example, if I try the P tag, or sorry, the P element, you'll see that we have multiple P's, and this might have kind of a disorganized output when you finally scrape. So that may not be ideal, especially if you're only going after this one piece of information right here that I tapped or I hit shift on. So let's try title instead. And now as you can see, the title is much more specific to what I was going after, and it has fewer items. So that is essentially the process you'll do when you try to find the right selector. If there aren't any good ones, you'll use the parent to move up, and this gives you more options, but it might also kind of go further away from the data you're after. So with that said, actually, sorry, let me backtrack. Let's go back to just the P. So as you can see, we have multiple P elements, and let's say this is your only option and you have to use this element type as your selector. So what you can do is actually use the arrows here. So we have, it's called choose a sibling element. We have some arrows, and this is essentially going to create an ordered list of all the items with a P. And then you can say with the arrow, I want the first one, or I want the second one. And you can do that by simply clicking up or down to move up or down. So if we continue to click up, you'll see that we're going through all the different P's on this page. So you can actually pick which one you want by just simply using the arrows. But a quick note about the sibling arrows is that it's all based on the position. So if you create some titles that say like, let's say a title 1, title 2, title 3, and the original title 1 happens to not be there on one page, then your other two P's will actually shift down, so then they will be misaligned by one cell. Because since it's based on the order it's always going to pick the first or the second, and it won't be able to kind of create a structured format where the empty cell will remain empty. It will just shift down. All right, so I hope that makes sense. So now back to kind of what I was saying before with the parent element is you can actually use it to move further up the page to get more options. As you can see, we now have a basic info and a thing called container style, and then we have padding, margin, and as you can see, you get further up, you go further out and up the information. So you can use this parent button as a way to get more selection options, or you can use it to kind of create a roadmap, meaning you can combine different selectors to make a specific to one that works for you. So let's go ahead and play with that a little bit. So what we'll do is let's kind of clear this out and start fresh. Let's say we want a specific example. So we do a new column. Let's say I want to capture the experience. So what I'll do here is, so I hover and shift, and as you can see, we now have an experience class. So let's try that, and it looks good. So we can press confirm. But now, as you can see, we're also capturing the word experience, which is not ideal. Let's say you want just the actual number and the years. So let's go back in and do that again. Actually, it's already there. So what we can do here is, as I mentioned, you can kind of hover and shift, and you see we have a strong element here, which could have been an option, but now we're getting multiple. So as I mentioned earlier, you can kind of actually use multiple selectors to kind of create a roadmap. So what we can do is actually use this strong and then the original class experience. So what you will essentially be doing is combining these two. So you say, I want the experience row, or sorry, the experience like mini container here. And then actually in the element selector box, you can type, and we can actually type the word strong, because that is what focuses on just this one piece of information. So again, we did the class experience, and then we typed in the element strong, and that now gets us just the information we're after. So let's do that one more time with a different example. So let's say we want the industry. Let's go ahead and give that a name. Cool. We'll do find, and we will hit shift, and once again, looks like the strong is it has too many other selectors is associated with, and if we do industry, we're getting that whole word with the actual industry itself. So what we can do is select industry, do confirm, and then type strong in it, and now we're getting just the industry strong. Cool. And what I'll do now is do one more specific example with that whole title scenario. So let's say that we want to do clearance, but let's pretend that there was no clearance class. Let's say you're stuck with just the P element. Obviously, this is going to be way more information than you need if you want just the clearance. But what we can do is use an advanced selector, and it's called the contains. So what we'll do is actually a colon, and then immediately after the colon, we'll type the word contains, and then open and close parentheses. And then inside that, you're going to type the word that you're searching for. So not the data that you're actually going after, but the title that you're going to be looking for. So let's do clearance. Ooh, spell that. All right, so now what we did was we essentially told DataMiner to look for the word clearance on this page. And now that we did that, what we can do is once again type the word strong to get specifically just that one area or that one piece of information. And this would actually work for any of them. So we can replace this with experience, or we can do this with industry, and pretty much any word, as long as it's on the page, you can do it with the contains. And I'm going to do, let's see, I feel like we should do one more example for these selectors. All right, I think, so one more thing I'll show you is actually going to be in the more focused in the recipe creator element. So what I'll do here is, let's just select the title again. So let's say that for some reason we do not have any good classes or any good element types. What we can actually do at this point is go to the bottom recipe creator and select View Elements HTML. And this is going to show us the full HTML available. So all the raw information that Data Miner is pulling stuff from. And even though we built this site to kind of be easy, and it's going to have all the stuff available, we can still kind of mock it all up to be a little bit more difficult. So instead of, let's say that there was no class and then there was no A tag, what we can actually do is go in this HTML and copy something from it, and so highlight and then copy, and then anything raw taken from the HTML, all you have to do is simply put it in square brackets and then paste it, the full thing, and then it works just as if it were from something suggested. So even though we already provide you with classes, we can pretend that this was maybe something called like data attribute equals headline, or maybe title equals headline, and anything from here. In fact, I wonder if we could actually try this. Let's try the unique URL, or sorry, the href. I wouldn't recommend this because this is going to be specific to just this one person, but it should work. Cool. So essentially what we did here was we're saying anything with this href highlight, and so it's getting the name and the image, and so that will work for, let's see, I guess they're all going to be classes. So yeah, I think that is about it. There will be some more selector options in a table further down in the help page. They're all going to be kind of similar, and essentially what you want to do is just kind of become familiar with those, and as you learn to use them, you'll be able to build and kind of create more advanced selectors. And at that point, you can pretty much use them on any site, because even though sites might be different, the same tricks and tips still apply, and you can kind of use them for any site. So I hope these videos were helpful. Thank you for watching, and of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on email support. All right, thanks, and I'll see you later. All right, bye.